Welcome to Tech and Trails. So today I am going to explain Cisco ISE design and implementation. So this video will be a detailed guide for how to design or how to prepare the documentation for Cisco ISE and what to keep in mind, and also the implementation, how to configure or do the initial setup of Cisco ISE. So let's start. So in the ISE deployment steps, there are two major things. One is the planning preparation and another is the installation and configuration. Install and configuration contain the installation and setup necessary policies, configuring integration with existing infrastructure. So those all the information which we are going to configure or do in the install, those we need to collect in advance in planning and preparation phase. Why we need that? So let's start further in the planning. So in the planning preparation, we need to first think, we need to understand, as in my first video I explained why we need a NAC solution, that we need to secure the infrastructure. So if customer is coming for implementation where customer is saying, okay, I have to secure my infrastructure basis for ISE, but we need to understand what are the requirement, what are the components or what are the I can say major phases where he want to implement the Cisco ISE. Okay, so yeah, let's understand the first understanding the requirement. Understanding requirement, the authentication, guest access, endpoint posture assessment. These are some example. So let me quickly draw some example what it should be like. So for example, he have two use cases. One is on wired, one is on wireless. So he want to protect both. For example, their office laptops, or apart from their IoT devices, printers, or any other devices, IP telephone, like that. We need to collect all those use cases. Like these components are going to connect on wired. Now we need to decide, okay, this office laptop, this support supplicant means we can do .1x. IoT, some devices support PIP-based authentication, some not. Based on the manufacturing details, we need to, okay, decide what authentication method we are going to do. Printers, we know some printers support also .1x. If those support, the printer customer is having support .1x, we can go with that. Or IP telephone, we know that supports map with profiling, we can go, that is also, but some IP phone also support PIP with authentication. So based on the use cases, we need to decide what kind of authentication method we are going to go with those use cases. So let me keep this wireless aside first. So for example, for office laptops, we can go with PIP TLS. For IoT, we can go with MAV if this device does not support anything. For printer, I'm keeping it simple for now. So for example, we can go with MAV for printer. For telephone, we can go with profiling. Every authentication method, do we need any further information before proceeding for the implementation? Yes. So for office laptop, as this laptop authenticate with ETLS or with .1x authentication, we need a directory. Active Directory mostly we say. So Active Directory can be a AD, which will be a local to site, local on-prem Active Directory, Microsoft or anything, or it can be a Azure AD, can be anything based on the requirement. So we need the help from the AD team also in order to have ISE integration. So based on if it's a AD, we will need credential in order to integrate ISE with AD. If it's a only Azure configuration, Azure AD, then for that we need a certain different configurations for which we need to share some details with them and we need to ask for certain details from them also. So these details should be prepared in advance. Okay. So let's see, we selected all the authentication on wired, then come to wireless. On wireless, we can say, okay, office laptops are there. Similarly, the same use case, AD and all those requirements will be same. We will just need a SSID or the network devices to incorporate that we will discuss in this one. So in second thing, there can be guest users. So for guest, we can discuss the further requirement that they need a self-registered or they need a sponsor portal. Two options are there. Or if they want to self-register with SMS integration, OTP integration, then we also need to discuss that. And then in the advance, we need to ask them, okay, we need their SMS gateway in order to integrate with Cisco ISE, so ISE can send the SMS. So like that, wireless, if any other production use cases, any IoT device, we can go with IPSK authentication for those devices. So we will need list of MAC address of those devices which are going to connect. Similar these devices, list of MAC addresses in advance. So these kind of detail we can prepare, or we can prepare a performer of high level design which will contain, okay, what kind of use cases customer required for this infra to run. Or there can be last requirement which can come for VPN also. So customer can say, okay, I have Cisco firewalls. I want to use Cisco ISE as a radius for those VPN devices authentication. So if user connect to VPN, it will authenticate from ISE. So that kind of that for office, if it's office laptop, so it's simply the radius authentication with that can also be done with the help of AD. Or if customer is also having additional requirement, as I said, like endpoint posture, which is to checking compliance of endpoint. So for that, we need to discuss further, okay, what kind of checklist they want to perform on the end devices. Like customer want to have the antivirus validated, or a Part1 firewall check, or any other checks. For that, we need supplicant, endpoint supplicant installed on that system. So posture check can be done. So because posture required a certain connector which can communicate with the IEs. So in order to do the scan, so there is an onboarding process that we will, I can say, take examples in the one of the practical session also. But as that connector needs some installation steps, all those things which maybe user won't be able to perform by its own. So in initial onboarding steps, so those should be done in advance with the help of any tool, or if a tool is not there, then that need to be done manually. So those things need to be discussed in advance. So once all these requirements are understood, for example, we have 10 requirements, but for now customer said, okay, go with the office Wi-Fi and guest requirement for now. For the same, we will go with the practical also. After understanding this, the next thing which we need to do, that is understanding the current network infrastructure. Why we need to understand it? So we discussed, okay, what authentication method they need, guest, they need a ETLS, or if they need to go with posture. For now, we go with, okay, employee and guest authentication. So both wired and wireless only. Okay. So we need to understand what kind of network devices they have in their infrastructure. The all devices they have, those are Cisco switches or Cisco wireless controllers, or what kind of devices. Because for guest to work, there is some guest redirect ACL which we say. So some devices support that, some does not support that. The older third-party device that does not support that. So we need to make sure what kind of infrastructure or the components they are having that should support the required AAA functionality, or support a radius COA also in order guest to work. And for authentication also, we need to make sure the network devices customer is using on their LAN, those should be capable of running .1x. So because there are some devices which are dummy devices, unmanaged devices, which cannot be managed or which cannot be configured to go with .1x. So in that case, we need to understand their network topology, that how their network, if they have any existing diagram, we can ask. So how their network topology is connected, we need to understand that their users are directly connected on the switches or Cisco switches, or there are any hubs coming in between and then users are connecting. Because before understanding these things, if we directly jump into implementation, then we will be into many troubles or many troubleshootings we need to do, where we won't even know, okay, where the user is connected, why this user is facing this issue. So those kind of challenges are there. So that's why we need to understand their network. Okay. So next thing is integration. So as I said in starting, like for authentication, we will need Active Directory. For that, the AD credential that we need to tell advance, like when we are going with implementation, we will need this credential in order to work. Second thing, like Okta or other services, these are for TechX or third-party integrations. So for that, if we need, it's advanced thing. If the customer already have knowledge, okay, they want to go with these kind of setups, that can be incorporated as a part of integration. And the before going with license third party is endpoint configuration, which we mostly say supplicant. So what is this endpoint or supplicant configuration? Endpoint means the user laptop, most of the cases, and the supplicant. So user system must support ETLS or .1x in order to proceed further with .1x authentication, as we discussed here. Second thing, enabling .1x on user system. So there are some certain services which need to be enabled, and those can be enabled by individual system also, or from the help of Active Directory also, by pushing group policies to multiple users. So we need to make sure that end customer is also aware that these services need to be enabled on the user system in order to go with the .1x authentication. So we need to make sure that users are aware that these new network changes are getting implemented. So if they face any challenge while connecting to network, so they must know whom to reach. So in that way, there will be easy to troubleshoot the issues, or easy to pinpoint where is the issue, what is the issue. Next thing is the licensing, that also need to be understood based on the user requirement. As I said, if user is not wanted to go with posture, then we can simply go with base licenses also. If they want to go with, okay, as I said, for IP phones, so we can go with profiling, then plus licenses are required. If they already have license, we need to tell, okay, you have these licenses, but functionality which we are asking, that is beyond this license scope. So that clarity should be discussed in the planning and preparation only, in order to avoid any kind of miscommunication in the during the project implementation. And also VMs, what kind of VMs they want to deploy, that I will explain later, like size wise, but the license will be same for all the VMs, like how many VMs they want to deploy. Based on that, VM count license is also required. Device admin, this is also additional requirement. If customer want to manage their network devices with the help of Cisco ISE and TechX, so they need to have device admin license. So this license is, as I explained earlier in previous video, this is a node based license. How many nodes user are going to deploy, those many licenses are required. So based on that, we need to give clarity. Okay, this is the current infrastructure which we are looking to deploy, and these much licenses are required. If those are there, we can tell them, okay, these are there, we are fulfilling the requirement. If additional need, we can tell, okay, additional licenses are required. Okay, so this one is the planning and preparation. For based on all this information, we need to prepare the HLD and LLD document. So HLD document will contain a high level diagram. Okay, how the node roles are contained, node roles will be enabled based on the personas we are going to deploy, and all the high level information, what kind of VMs we are going to deploy, what are the use cases, all those. And low level will contain all the step-by-step configuration. What IP I'm going to configure, those IP address also, what commands I'm going to push on all the network devices, those commands also will be available in LLD document. So during implementation, we are not going to miss any commands or certain configuration. So that will be a helpful thing to go. And also during project handover, it is easy to provide, like we will share this document, and a operational team will be easy to understand what implementation is already completed. So, and where they need to look for what information if they need to validate something on the configuration perspective or on the documentation perspective. So next step is, so in the planning phase, the major step which we need to decide, or major decision, is the configuration option, at which option we have to go with. So in ICE, there are many options available based on the end customer requirement, like standalone, small deployment, medium, or large deployment. So this is a major part of the documentation where we need to decide where we are going with what kind of deployment. So let me explain quickly. So standalone is a single node where we will deploy one ICE node. All the services will be enabled. So in the next page, I'm going to explain what are the services on the one node only. So this is mostly we use for evaluation purpose, like lab testing or POC purposes. Like in the production, we never recommend to go with single node only. There should always be a failover. Even if we have less requirement, we can go with the minimum resources of Cisco ISE, and we can build at least HA, which is the next small deployment HA. In HA, we will be running two ISE nodes. When I'm saying two ISE nodes, it means it can be a two ISE VMs which we can deploy, or it can be two ISE dedicated hardware from Cisco. There are Cisco hardware dedicatedly coming for Cisco ISE which we can use. And the last one is the medium or large, we can say, because in the there are some roles which we enable as PAN, MND, PX, PSN, or PX grid. So medium and large deployments are distributed deployment, where roles are distributed among multiple nodes. So distributed deployment will be for medium or large scale network. Even if the medium scale network is not having that much high requirement, or it's coming between medium or small, Then we can also go with HA deployment or adding one additional node as a failover for that location to distribute load based on the requirement. Okay. So let's proceed further with the role placement, how the role placement should be. So to go proceed further with the role placement discussion, let's take an example of one first HA setup. So for example, we planned, okay, this is a small site or bit more than small or between medium. We are going with HA setup where we need two ICE node at least. One we can put in different data center, another in secondary data center in order to keep the high availability. So there are some roles, PAN node, MNT, PSN or PX grid. So PAN node provide all the management. So a user, IT user who is going to access these devices, so he need to have access to that PAN node where he can configure all the configuration. MNT node, the node which will be keeping all the logs, all the data related to all the authentication, caching information, everything. PSN, all the network devices, switches, routers, everything will be pointing toward the PSN for sending authentication packets. So these are the three major roles which we mostly go for small or medium deployment. PX grid is only required if we have third-party integration for contextual data sharing. That can be DNAC or any other component. So for example, in this deployment, we will consider we don't have PX grid. We will go with these three nodes because most of the deployment having these requirements only. So in this HA setup, if you see, once we deploy the ICE node, this is a deployment page of ICE where it is shows to enable the roles. So in a standalone node, if we go with the testing or testing VM, these all services are by default enabled. So when we need to go with the high availability, we need to make sure same services are enabled on both nodes. Admin, MNT, PSN session service, profiling service, or if we want to go with device admin also, we can enable. So these services should be enabled from this. If PX grid we want, we can enable it. Otherwise, no, not compulsory required. If only integration is there with third-party components, then only PX grid need to be enabled. So these we can in HA deployment or standalone, we can enable on one node. And similarly enabled on standby node. So in this active standby role, for administrator services, only one will be active always. Admin need to access that node to configure the configuration. If that node goes down, secondary we need to manually promote as a primary. Based on these services, it will take 20 minutes almost to come as a primary, and we can do the configuration on it. MNT role, there's no primary standby required because all the logs from the PSN services getting shared to both nodes. So same logs are available on both, but yes, we can define the role in the deployment, like which one I want to use as primary or secondary. So the admin node will fetch role data or logs from that node only. So there's some certain services which will be running on primary, but for log storage perspective, both are getting data from PSN, and there is one catch. They are not syncing with each other in MNT role. So if I, for example, one node is down for one day and another node is up on that day, that node will having all the logs, but this node will not having logs for that one day. If it came up later, it will not sync that older data. So if PSN is going to share with it, that's fine. PSN can also hold session for certain duration. After that, it will share if MNT is down. But if that duration is more than the MNT downtime, then that MNT will lose that data. So in that case, if we don't able to find some logs on primary, we can switch the role on to secondary and try to look into the reports of secondary also. That option is also possible, and there is no reload or anything required in order to switching MNT role. But switching administrator role, the node services will restart. Third one is PSN. So PSN services will also be enabled on both nodes. IP address will be used on these switches in order for radius or TACX services. For device admin, if it is required, we can use for both. So this was the HA setup. But what if customer have medium infrastructure where customer want to go with medium setup or a distributed deployment? So as I said, so in distributed deployment, so we need to understand the requirements. So there are two kind of distributed deployment. One is medium, one is large. So as I said, we have rules: PAN, MNT, PSN, PX grid. Same rules we have PAN, MNT, PSN, px grid. So in medium deployment, most of the cases, what we do, we use one node for the services. For PSN, we use dedicated node, and we can enable PX grid service on same PSN or any of these node also if PX grid required. If not required, then we will go with dedicated PSN. And based on the deployment size, we can go with multiple PSN, 10 PSN, 5 PSN, 20 PSN based on the requirement. So mostly 10, 20 are part of mostly large one. So we can say 4 to 5 PSN, we will go with this kind of deployment where PAN and MNT both are sharing. So it's not like one, we will go with active standby. In medium also, we will be having high availability. So we will be having one node which is in one data center enabled with PAN and MNT. Another data center we have same PAN and MNT. So in this case, this is a primary, this is secondary. Admin need to access this, but all these PSN we have in the deployment will be sending logs to this both MNT. And the switches will be sending authentication request to the PSN. If we have more than 2 PSN or 3 PSN, so based on the nearest PSN from that location, switch will be sending data authentication request to that PSN node. Whatever configuration we are doing on PAN node, it is replicated on all the nodes. So same configuration is available on all the nodes. We cannot directly access to PSN or configure anything. We need to access PAN node only. So in the large deployment, what we do mostly for PAN, we have dedicated node. For MNT, we have dedicated node like that in high availability. Secondary PAN, secondary MNT is also a dedicated node. So dedicated node provide high performance. So that why we need, because this large deployment, we can have up to 50 PSN nodes. So now let's proceed further. So after having discussion, okay, to go with which design, for example, we went with HA setup. Most of the cases, this high availability or 3 node, 4 node deployment where 2 are sharing all the services, 2 PSNs will be enabled, like this medium deployment I said. So these kind of mostly deployment come into picture. So let's proceed further with the system requirements. Now we selected, okay, we go with 4 node deployment, but next we need, if we are going with VM or even hardware also, we need to decide what kind of hardware to go with or what kind of VM we need to deploy, because there are many options in Cisco to go with. So let's discuss a little bit by all those options. So this is first extra small. Extra small for evaluation purposes, as I said, as we can deploy standalone, we can go POC lab, or if customer having some very small requirements, small branch office, they want to deploy only one ISE node or HA, and they want to go with only TechX or small services. So extra small node can be used. But for most of the productions, there is a Cisco 3615, 366, 3655, 3695. So the 3700 series. So these are there. So based on the performance, we can proceed further. So how much performance we want. So we have Cisco deployment guide where you can go and see how much sessions these ISE nodes support. So to select the scalability, there are 2 options we need to, I can say, make sure to consider. One is concurrent session. Second is authentications per second. So how many authentication per seconds are going to hit this PSN node, and how many concurrent sessions will be there. Concurrent means I have an infrastructure which is distributed across the entire world, and I have 10k or I can say 20k users. But as the all entire world had different time regions, so not all 20k users are connecting at same time. Concurrent means connected and live users. I no need to count the users which are not there, not connected to net, which are connected, running, using their system, and once they disconnected, their session will be terminated. So those are the concurrent, means live users. For that only I need to pay for the license also, concurrent licenses. So based on the concurrent session, so this every node have a limit to take care of the authentication sessions. How many concurrent sessions these can support, the maximum. And those are different. As I said, in the deployment, we can go with a single node HA deployment, enabling PAN, MNT, or PSN services on same node. In that case, the session limit will reduce. But if I use this node as a dedicated PSN, then session limit will increase in based on the deployment architecture. So based on the requirement, we need to decide, okay, this much maximum session can come online at a time, and we can decide the deployment. So in the scalability guide that is available, so we can look into that also. And based on that, we can select the deployment node which we want to go. Okay. Now in every model, you see there are some CPU changes. CPU changes and memory changes are for performance, and storage changes are to store the logs. So if you see in every model, there is some limit availability of storage in a different sizes. So as I said, if we go with distributed deployment, so that matters during that kind of decisions. So in distributed deployment for PSN node, no need to have high storage. So we can go with less storage for PSN node, and for MNT node, which is going to store the logs, we can go with high storage in order to store more logs for more data. So in Cisco website, there are certain OVF available to download to deploy Cisco ISE in a lab or in a production environment. So which one to select? So based on the requirement, as I said, this one having option of 3715 to 3755. I will show in the practical also. So as I have downloaded this too for the practical purpose, because we are going to deploy in a lab and 300 storage is more than enough. So it will have a default template to go with 300 storage only. Okay, storage is pre-configured, means 300. Now I will have option to choose between the CPU and memory. So as you say, 3715, 3755, 3715, 3755. These two are having different CPU options or RAM options. So in this, during deployment, I will get those options to select which one I want to choose. Or there will be some extra small options are also there. I can choose that also. So those options are available to go with. So next thing, similar 3615 and 55, that is also for PSN. We can go with 300, or we can go with the 600 based on the requirement. That is also, but most of the cases in distributed deployment, the 600 size we choose for PAN node mostly, and this 1200 or 1800 or 2400 we choose for MNT nodes. So most of the cases we go with 1200 because this can also store logs for a large deployment. But if we have extra large, I can say deployment where the BSN count is more than 20, so we can go with 1800 or 2.4 TB storage in MNT node in order to store the logs. In that case, we also need to choose 3695. If you see 3695 with more memory, because the MNT node have to process more data and that will require more memory. And these high CPU with less RAM, these kind of options are available for PAN node, where we no need to go for any kind of log processing, but it need to do the configuration, managing all the cluster, all those things. And also same option we can go for PSN if we need high performance on the PSNs also. And one thing which we need to consider, if we are going with VMs, that we have option, we can later on we can reduce the CPU size also. If it's like the requirement is, for example, in initial days the requirement was less, in scalability we can increase it. So that option is there. For that, we don't need to redeploy the OVF again. Same VM we can shut down and edit it and update the resources. But we need to make sure we should go with standard thing only. If it's say 24, we should go with 24. We should not be going with from 16 to 20 vcores. So that is not a recommended from one to go with. Similar to memory also, we should not from the 32 to 64 gig. That because Cisco ISE internal architecture is built in a way where if we go with the 32 gig, it will partition all that memory or define predefined memory for certain services. And if we go with 96, it will also increase memory of certain services. So those services can perform well. But if we reduce these things in a production environment, it can cause errors on the deployment or in the performance also. In a lab, we will not see any challenges doing that, because In the lab, there is no much authentications or not huge data is coming. But if we do it for production nodes, then it can cause challenges. So we should always go with fixed value, which is defined by Cisco. So every OVF will have internal template available for all the nodes. If we increase the memory, it will automatically detect which one is there to make sure that it is matching the exact requirement what is required for that particular node. So this one, the system requirement, which we would need to define. So as we said, we are going to deploy two node deployment in a HA setup. So for this setup, we will be proceeding with extra small. I hope I was able to provide all the information which is required for the design and deployment and planning. So these are the high level one. So going in LLD, you need to have the, as I said, the IP address details, like what IP I need to sign on, VM, DNS, DSCP, gateway, all those information. So as we are going with lab setup, so those information can quickly gather. But yes, in production environment, we need to make sure those informations are available in advance in order to go with the deployment. Okay, thank you for watching. For the implementation part, I will be posting a new the next video. So stay tuned. If you like the video, please hit the like button and do subscribe